Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Leartowych, and I'm the Director of Nursing and Health Policy with the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, better known as RNAO, and it's really my pleasure to be able to welcome you this afternoon to our virtual dialogue with members around RNAO's resolution around end of life that was passed by consultation representatives in 2014. This is, I believe, the third in a series of webinars, of which over, I believe, 600 colleagues have participated in webinars to date. And we do have another webinar that is coming up, I believe, on September the 14th. And registration information is available on rnao.ca. That dialogue will be with Dr. Vanessa Burkowski, RNAO's president, and it will be very similar to the format that we're going to be following today. So if you're expecting new content, I'm not sure that there will be any specifically. I mean, there certainly will be different conversations, I'm sure, and different perspectives that are offered, but it's the same format, just in case if you're wondering about that. Before we begin, I just wanted to give you a brief description of some of the technical aspect and some of our house rules for the webinar, and then we can move into the presentation. So there are two methods for you to be able to participate this evening, and we really do want to hear from you. And you can do so by phone or by the chat feature in the WebEx platform. Hopefully, you've had a chance to be able to log on to the WebEx system. Josephine would have sent you an email with information on how to access that, and you'll be able to see the slides that are up there as well. So we're going to ask you, though, if you could please pause your comments and questions until we've arrived to the designated discussion point, and that will be following the presentation. And we ask, though, in the meantime, if you could please mute your lines until that happens. And you can mute your line either by hitting the mute function on your phone if you know where it is, or if you're not too sure where it is, or maybe you don't have one, you can hit *6. And we ask that you please mute your lines now at any point where you're not talking. This just helps as a courtesy for everyone on the line to minimize any background noise. When it does come time to for the discussion, we ask that you please begin by just stating your name, followed by your question and comment. And what we can do is, Josephine, I'm just looking at my notes here. It says we can call on you to speak in the order of submission. Is that on if people online indicates that?
Sure. So maybe if we ask participants to just give their name first on the phone line.
Perfect.
Or submit their name on the chat.
Okay.
And then we'll call on them.
So thankfully, this is a great opportunity for me to introduce Josephine Moe, who's with me. Josephine is the executive assistant to RNAO CEO, Dr. Doris Grinspan, and really is the coordinator of all of this tonight. So a huge round of virtual applause for Josephine for doing a great job in bringing us together. And what Josephine has suggested is if you are interested in speaking, and again, we want to hear from you, if you wanted to maybe just type in your name onto the chat function for the WebEx, it just would be a lot more organized that way, and we can call on you rather than when we open the lines and we have a number of people who try to speak at once, and we want to ensure that everyone gets their turn. And then the second option is if you don't want to necessarily speak on the phone, you can also type in your question or comment in the chat box, and we can address it as well. So the way that tonight is going to work is I am going to give a brief presentation, and the presentation really is meant to update our members as well as others who have joined the line. We do have a number of people who have registered, over 150, and of RNAO members, some who are not members, and those who are not members, I would really encourage you to consider membership within RNAO, and there's details on our website, rnao.ca, to make that happen. And then we also have some other of our colleagues from different healthcare professions and even a couple members of the public, and we're very happy to have everyone online this evening. So following the presentation then really will be your time to be able to provide your comments, questions, and dialogue. So again, I'm just hearing a little bit of background noise. So just a reminder, if you don't mind, to please put your phone on mute. And if you don't know how to do that, if your phone doesn't have a button for that, if you want to press *6, please. Josephine. So really, today is about an update on the resolution that was passed in 2014 at our annual general meeting by the consultation representatives who were there. And just to give us a bit of a refresher on what that resolution looked like, we're just going to do a quick overview. So at that particular time that the resolution was being put forward, there really was a national discussion that was underway. And it was looking at different end-of-life issues, palliative care, as well as assisted death. And the background and impetus for the resolution is really, at the end of the day, the decision around to permit, assisted suicide or euthanasia really does rest with the public. And at the time, the resolution, again, there was a lot of interest in this issue. The political parties were talking about it, and they were certainly wanting to engage in more discussion. And RNAO, of course, was being pressed to ask by stakeholders and media to comment on this issue. Next slide, please. And so the resolution really meant to acknowledge that any decision around that really rests with the public, but really meant to encourage a dialogue on the issue. And then also it provided a series of principles that ought to be considered when there is a dialogue around assisted suicide and or euthanasia. And Josephine, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide there. And so again, this goes over a number of proposed considerations. Want to continue, please? And again. So the resolution is available on our website if you want to read it in more detail. It was carried, and really the resolution was the impetus for us advancing our dialogue. And of course, the webinars that we're providing today and have provided in the past really are just one example of really nurses taking a leadership role in advancing this dialogue. So, flash forward to today. So a lot has happened since the 2014 annual general meeting. Hello? Sorry, I thought I heard a comment. Just as a reminder, if you wouldn't mind, please muting your lines. You can either hit the mute button or press *6 on your phone. In terms of the current context, in February of this year, we did have the Supreme Court of Canada, which of course is the highest level of the judiciary court within the country, issue a landmark decision that found that the prohibitions on physician-assisted suicide, as what was termed within that court decision, were inconsistent with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, also known as the Constitution in Canada. And the Supreme Court of Canada gave the federal government until February 2016 to revise the law. So that's a one-year deadline. This is very typical for when the Supreme Court finds that a law is unconstitutional. They will give the government time to be able to respond to it. So I'm just hearing some echoing. Just a reminder, please, if you can mind muting your telephones either with the mute key or with *6, that would be great, please. So since that time, the federal government has established a 3-person panel to engage Canadians and key stakeholders to inform the government's response to the court's decision. It's my understanding that this committee is a bit delayed at the moment, given the fact that we're in an election period right now. At the same time, the provincial and territorial governments have moved forward with a 9-person pan-Canadian advisory committee to provide advice on policies, practices, and safeguards to be able to respond to the Supreme Court's decision. And this, Ontario has been taking a considerable leadership role in convening this group. And you may also be aware that Quebec has already passed Bill 52, which enables assisted death within that jurisdiction. Just to give you a little bit of the lay of the landscape, the Supreme Court found that the provisions specifically within the Criminal Code of Canada, which is a federal piece of legislation, were unconstitutional. So the federal government needs to respond because that is a federal piece of legislation. But at the same time, there are so many elements of this issue that really fall within the provincial jurisdiction. So for example, provinces and territories are responsible for the delivery of health care. They're responsible for overseeing issues related to consent, to capacity, and to a number of other areas. So there is work that needs to be done at a federal level, but then there's also a lot of work that needs to be done at the provincial and territorial level as well. Josephine? So in terms of some of the activities that we, RNAO as an association, have been engaged in to date, we had between October 2014 as well as February 2015, we've had over 600 attendees who have participated in webinars that are similar to what's being offered tonight. We also had a very successful keynote panel at our 2015 AGM, so a year after the resolution was carried, and it was entitled End of Life Care, Voices and Perspectives, and it was a very diverse panel that included representatives from our palliative care nurses interest group, our parish nursing interest group. We had an international guest, nursing scholar, I believe, from Belgium, a family member of a loved one who passed away, and it's not included on the slide here, but we also had a lawyer who was able to bring some legal experience to the discussion, especially given the decision that the Supreme Court of Canada had issued. And we did have 560 attendees, including members of the public, who showed up on that day, and it was very impressive. It was moderated by Carol Gore, who's a columnist with the Toronto Star. For those of you who were there, I'm sure you could sense, obviously, first off was that the room was filled. I'm not sure that there were any seats left, but there was a really great dialogue, and I think it left people wanting even more to engage and to discuss. And Carol Gore, who was the moderator, as I mentioned, is a columnist with the Toronto Star. She had provided a follow-up article in the Toronto Star that was really commending nurses for taking a leadership role in providing voice to this issue, to engaging the public, and to not shying away from having dialogue and discussion. So that brings us to the importance of the nursing voice within this discussion. So first and foremost, RNAO's priority is we want to advance quality palliative and end-of-life care across Canada, and we want to ensure that people have universal access to publicly funded palliative and end-of-life services, and that really needs to be a very key priority moving forward. And for those of you who've had a chance to look at RNAO's 2015 federal election platform, you will see that in there, where we're calling for the resources needed to be able to ensure that whether you are in the far north, the east, the west, no matter where you are in Ontario or in Canada for that matter, that you do have the ability to access high-quality palliative care services and end-of-life care, and the important role that registered nurses and nurse practitioners have in providing that care. And at the same time as well, though, we also are wanting to uphold and respect the Supreme Court of Canada's decision, and in doing so, being able to call for a principled regulatory framework, and a framework that acknowledges an individual's autonomy, and this was autonomy was a central theme that you'll find within the Supreme Court of Canada's decision, while at the same time ensuring that there are the appropriate regulatory pieces that are in place to protect those who are, especially those who may be in a vulnerable position, and ensuring that we do have regulations that are in place. And the voice of RNs and NPs, I think, is a very reliable and expected source of information for the public. It's no surprise that nurses are consistently ranked one of the most trusted professions historically for, I believe, over 14 years. I'm just pulling that specific number out of my head, so I may be off by a little bit, but I believe it's definitely, I think, been over a decade that nurses have ranked the highest in terms of public trust. And of course, our nursing students have very valued perspectives that need to be captured within the dialogue as well. Nursing students, nurses are all citizens. We are members of the public as well, and we do have, we need to be heard. And specifically, there are two ends of our association that relate to our involvement in all of this. And our ends really are our strategic objectives that are identified by our Board of Governors, our Board of Directors, and these are what myself, under the leadership of our CEO, Dr. Doris Grinspan, what we are tasked with operationalizing. And particularly and relevant to the discussion today, the end number 3, which is speaking out on emerging issues that impact nurses, our nursing profession, as well as health and health care, and the end number 4, which is influencing healthy public policy. So there are ways that you can get involved, and this is really where I want people to take close attention to the links that I'm providing you today. So I mentioned that there are 2 opportunities to get involved and to have your voice heard, both as a registered nurse or nurse practitioner or nursing student, as well as a member of the public. And so the federal panel, the 3-person panel that's been convened by the federal government, is wanting to hear from the public. And you can actually go onto their website, which is included on there. For those of you who are not on the WebEx platform, I will spell out the website address. It's www.ep-ce-ca, and that will take you to the panel's consultation page. And then there is the Provincial Advisory Group, and the provincial government right now is inviting all Ontarians to complete a survey that will inform the government's response to this at a provincial level. And the deadline for that survey is October the 1st. And so the survey does not take too long to complete, and I think it's really, really important and pivotal at this moment in time to consider getting involved in both of these opportunities. I believe that the federal panel provides an opportunity to get involved by contributing to an issues book, and they're seeking to identify what are the issues that the government is going to need to grapple with when responding to the decision. And then the provincial group is looking at it's a survey, and I believe there's also, I believe, an opportunity to input comments that you have. And so I know I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but please, please, please consider having your voice heard and being able to contribute to these opportunities. If you have any questions or need assistance in terms of accessing these links, I didn't spell out the provincial advisory link because it is quite long, but if you wanted to call RNAO or email us, we can certainly provide you with that link. And if you wanted to just call or email and ask for myself, Tim Leartovych, Tim in policy, or just say that you want to speak to someone in policy, we will gladly provide you with the link to be able to complete that.
And just to remind people what I've received in that.
Yes, thank you, Josephine. Josephine just reminded me that I believe it was yesterday we sent out a email notice to all RNAO members with the links to both of those consultation opportunities. As well, We also provided links to a number of RNAO resources, so archives of previous webcasts, information on the panel that I talked about at the AGM, as well as a link to the resolution itself, and other resources that we've compiled in this regard. So check your email if you haven't had a chance to yet, or if you're not on email, again, feel free to give us a call after the fact, and we will ensure that you get whatever information you do need. And I just want to again emphasize that the provincial survey the deadline is October the 1st, so there's about 3 weeks to be able to complete it. And I believe that the federal panel is a bit slowed right now because of the election, so there is a bit more time to provide input there. But it would be important to, I would encourage you, I know we're all very busy and have wear many hats, but to consider completing those as soon as possible. So in terms of next steps that from an RNAO home office perspective, we're going to continue to engage with our membership, with politicians and with the media to advance a formal public dialogue on end-of-life issues that include assisted death, and particularly given that we're calling for a principled regulatory framework response to the Supreme Court's decision relating to assisted death, and also ensuring that we advance access to palliative care and end-of-life care services to ensure that everyone in Ontario and Canada has access to those services, and really highlighting the role of the RN and the role of the NP as key providers of both palliative and end-of-life care. For those who are on social media, we do have a Facebook page, and also we have an RNAO Twitter account. And our CEO, Doris Grinspan, also has a Twitter account, and you'll see a lot of commentary and sharing of articles and information through those channels if you are interested in learning more. So stay tuned through those avenues, and of course, we'll also be sending out emails, and stay tuned to the website. We try to post as often as we can. And again, for those of you who may not know, it's pretty easy. RNAO.ca is the website link to get more information. So that concludes our brief presentation, and really the objective of it was to provide a bit of an overview of the resolution from 2014, but then also to really provide an update of what has happened since that period of time, and a lot has happened. And I think that this is a very exciting time, and this is a time where really as nurses we have an important opportunity to be able to advance dialogue and engagement of the public. And so I'm going to turn things now over to you, and we're going to open up the lines here. We do have about an hour for this portion of the webinar, and we're looking forward to it. So in terms of how to proceed, what we've asked people to do is, if they wouldn't mind indicating on the chat feature in the WebEx that they're interested in speaking, or if you would like to input your question or comment in there, but you're welcome to do that as well, and we can read it out. And for those of you who aren't on the WebEx, what we'll do maybe towards the end of the presentation, we will open it up to anyone else who would like to have an opportunity to say a few words. Given that we do have a number of people on the line, we have about 90 people who are on the WebEx, and there are also some people who are not on the WebEx but are on the teleconference. To ensure that we are able to hear from as many people as possible, if I could ask you to please keep your remarks to as concise as possible. Again, we want to have a dialogue, but we also want to ensure that we can hear from as many people as possible. And so not wanting to be intrusive or rude if your dialogue goes on for longer than 3 or 4 minutes. At that point, unfortunately, I will have to ask you to wrap things up, just so that we can provide an opportunity for as many people to be able to speak as possible. So that being said, if you are on mute, if you've used the *6 to mute your line, *7 is the way to unmute your line. And so Josephine, why don't you let us know in terms of who is in the queue right now for speaking?
Sure. So we've received one question so far through the chat. Thank you. And the question is, are you going to work with the Ontario Medical Association and other professional organizations to coordinate this discussion?
That is a really great question. And it's actually a very timely question because we have a really great opportunity, RNAO, to work with OMA and a number of other associations through different coalitions and through different groups. And actually we had a meeting of one of those coalitions today. And certainly we would be open to learning from other organizations, being able to share information, exploring opportunities to work together. We certainly would be open to exploring those opportunities.
Thank you, Tim. Our next question is, how can chapters provide a summary of input from members to RNAO and to provincial decision makers?
So, sorry, Justin, can you repeat that again?
Sure. How can chapters provide a summary of input from members to RNAO and to provincial decision makers?
Okay, good. So I believe what the person is asking is they're wanting to provide us, RNAO Home Office, with input from the chapter, and that is something that we absolutely would very much welcome. And I think that the best route to doing that would be to email myself. And Josephine, I'm wondering if there's a way of being able to share my email address with people. I think Josephine is going to work on doing that. And certainly, if you email me, I will ensure that your comments are reviewed. And I'll also, of course, share them with Doris and Vanessa, who are the three of us are leading these. So I think Josephine right now is just putting up my contact information there. So we would welcome to hear from any chapter or interest group with your input, because really this is meant to be a dialogue, and so we'd love to hear from that. So Josephine, the next comment or person who would like to speak?
Nothing so far.
Okay, is there anyone that would like to speak? If you wouldn't mind inputting your name into the queue on the WebEx, please.
Okay, our next question is, how will the RNAO express the importance of funding for palliative care as part of the end-of-life dialogue?
That's a great question. One of the ways that we've already started with our advocacy around palliative care is with our, I mentioned the election platform, and so wanting to get this as an election issue, wanting to ensure that both health, healthcare, and nursing are included within the election discourse. And so if you haven't had a chance already, take a look. rnao.ca/election2015 is our one-stop shop for the federal election resources. And you will see directly within our platform an explicit call for improving access to palliative care. In terms of other activities, to bring attention to this, it's something that is brought up ongoingly in our advocacy when we're engaging with different politicians and political leaders, bureaucrats. If you have specific suggestions as to how we can advance this issue, we'd certainly would welcome hearing from you on this. You would likely know as well that we have our end-of-life care BPG, which is a clinical resource that certainly is being used by a number of nurses and other healthcare professionals around the world. And of course, though, acknowledging, though, that there are distinctions between end care and the end of life, as well as looking at palliative care. And certainly we have involvement in both of those. And certainly we have a wealth of expertise in the areas in terms of an interest group that focuses on palliative care. And I'm not sure if Leslie's on the line, but Leslie is the chair of that interest group, and we've had an opportunity to attend a government consultation, Parliamentary Assistant John Fraser. He is the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, and one of his mandates that was given to him by the Minister was to look at how to access to palliative care. And so we had an opportunity to actually contribute to that consultation. And I believe where Mr. Fraser is currently at is he was trying to do a scoping review to get a better sense in terms of what his work will actually entail and what it will look like. And some of the areas that we focused on is really acknowledging the nursing role in delivering palliative and end-of-life care, really trying to build, acknowledge that there is a nursing expertise and the need to be able to acknowledge that, have the system acknowledge and embrace that. We looked, of course, at as well issues related to scope of practice and ensuring that registered nurses have the appropriate scope of practice to be able to deliver quality palliative care services. And if we look to other jurisdictions, there are certainly RNs who are practicing in much more expanded roles, and that is something that we're really trying to also champion within Ontario. And then also we talked about the structure of the healthcare system and how there are opportunities to be able to enhance it, particularly bringing in and incorporating elements of our ECHO model. And so I'd really look forward to as well continuing opportunities to work with the Palliative Care Nurses Interest Group as a group of very dedicated and highly expert palliative care nurses, and also to hear from other members who have ideas. So I think that's a long-winded way of me trying to say that if you have specific ideas or areas that we can enhance our advocacy, I'd really welcome to hear your ideas.
Great. Barb Roche, would you like to speak on the line?
Hi, Barb. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
My question, you might or might not be able to answer this. We're getting, fallish here, and the deadline for the Supreme Court is going to come up pretty quickly. And I could envision that we might not have a new law by the date that the Supreme Court has set out. And my question is, would this be like abortion in the sense of if there's no law against something, then it is acceptable, or would, if the government doesn't create a new law specifically regarding assisted suicide?
So it's a really good question, and it's a question that would benefit, I think, from a very well thought out and researched answer. And I think that it's something that, something that we're working on and looking at here, and that could benefit from a greater legal expertise. But what I can say is that the Supreme Court of Canada holds, by virtue of the Constitution, a very powerful role and does have the ability to strike down laws if it believes that it is against the Constitution. And it has done that in this case, and it has given a very specific deadline. And so, so my understanding is that come February, I'm not sure the specific date, if there's no framework in place, that doesn't matter. The law at that point will be struck down. Now, there is rumor that, and some speculation that I've heard, that the federal government may seek an extension by another year, and in which case, if that extension is granted, the court would again delay striking down the law for another year. But again, the government has not formally requested that, and we also find ourselves in the midst of an election. And so depending upon what happens following the election and what government ends up coming to power, I think will really be telling in terms of what happens next. I mean, our goal from an RNAO advocacy perspective is we certainly do not want to be in a position where come February there's no framework and all that's left is huge question marks and ambiguity. I think that is a very scary situation that none of us want to be in, and so that's why we're really trying to target a lot of our advocacy to ensuring that we do have both federal and provincial leadership to being able to provide that principal framework. So in terms of you know, a specific answer to that question,
well, that's gone crazy.
better advice leading up to it.
Okay, Tim, you might have touched upon this already, but the participant would like to still reiterate their question. What is the feeling you are receiving from the Ontario government concerning this discussion? It appears that they have not been speaking about their own policies.
So the impression that we've received from the Ontario government has actually been that they are very interested in wanting to have a discussion about this. And Ontario, as I mentioned before, has been playing a leading role in convening that pan-Canadian panel that I mentioned. And particularly given the fact that they are also wanting to hear from Ontarians, and they've launched the consultation process that's underway. I'm not sure if the individual who's posed that question, I was mentioning earlier that there is a survey that's available. It closes October the 1st. It's being led by the province of Ontario, and they're really wanting to hear from Ontarians about this issue. I think that sends a pretty promising sign, coupled with the fact that they've played such a pivotal role in establishing the committee. I think that much remains to be seen. It'll be really interesting to see what is the outcome of the stakeholder consultation, as well as what is the outcome of the work of the panel. RNAO certainly will take all opportunities that we are able to get to contribute to the work of the panel, and to be able to provide that voice of nursing. But also, we encourage all of you to take the opportunity to be able to participate in the survey.
Okay. The next question is, will the CNO develop practice guidelines once the law is revised and passed? As well, will they allow for nurses the option to opt out of assisted suicide or euthanasia? What should nurses do before the...
That's a really good to whomever opposed it. I certainly cannot speak for the College of Nurses in Ontario, so I don't have an answer question. So that remains to be seen, and I think it's for us to have dialogue with the college, but unfortunately I can't the college. I can't answer. Just wanting to remind everyone, I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. If you wouldn't mind, please mute the line, either through *6 or by hitting the mute key on your phone. That would be great. But just in regards to that last question, I think that it will be very important to have practice standards, to have clear guidelines in place, and that ties in with what we're calling for in terms of having that principled regulatory framework. And
I'm sure they're working on them. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, if you wouldn't mind pressing the mute key, please. It would be really, I think, great to be able to have healthcare professionals working together in approaching this issue. While the Supreme Court of Canada has indicated that this is, they've termed it physician-assisted death, we know that registered nurses and nurse practitioners, nursing students are going to, they're going to have a role in this. We are the healthcare professionals who are most accessible to people, whether it be, you know, in planning, you know, for end of life, during end of life, during the palliative process, when people are experiencing chronic illness, and so we have that contact with clients, and certainly there will be discussions that people will initiate, and I think that there's a real opportunity for you know, education and to be able to support nurses in responding to that. So there's still a lot of work that needs to happen, and I'm really excited to hear people talking about the need for this type of assistance and guidance, and it's something that I think that there's a role for many of us to play. When I say many of us, I'm referring to, you know, certainly RNAO and a number of other stakeholders.
Our next question is, how will RNAO address the current inequality in access to both palliative care and not necessarily doctor-assisted death, but the disparity in actions which patients have access to depending on their physician's personal beliefs and willingness to ensure their terminal patients do not suffer endlessly prior to death?
I think that's a really great question, and in terms of access to palliative care services, that's incredibly important, ensuring that people have palliative care and also quality end-of-life care. That's something that we're in all of our policies. We work where the opportunities arise, and doing so. I'm just sorry, just if a reminder to please mute your line. A lot of static. And if you can press stars, if you don't have a mute key on your phone. So certainly, I think ways of doing that are to really advocate and advance the role of RNs and NPs as being enablers to delivering access to palliative care services. I think that all of us on the phone here know of the value and the importance of the role, and I think that we as RNAO have an opportunity to be able to ensure that decision makers are aware of this as well, and to really advocate and advance for the role of RNs and NPs and nursing students in delivering care, having, of course, adequate funding models to be able to support this, and also ensuring that we have a health structure of the healthcare system that that really does enable access to palliative care services. And I think that the ECHO model, Enhancing Community Care for Ontarians model, really is an enabler of making that happen, and really an enabler of person-centered care. I think that the question around, I believe the person's asking a question about conscientious objection. So what if, I as a healthcare professional, for, personal beliefs, object to this, what would that mean in terms of access to care for Ontarians? And I think that it's a really good point. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that question right now. And it's something that I think is not easily answered, and something that we could certainly benefit from hearing more about from members. So if you have ideas or thoughts, certainly we'd like to hear that from you. I believe that the resolution, Josephine, if you wouldn't mind, are you able to bring back up the resolution on the slide? I'm just going to get Josephine here. She's going to, you can go back to the resolution and the next one, please. And the next one. And the next one. Here we go. And so one of the principles that was included within the resolution was that no health professional or organization should be required to participate, meaning that, and I think that recognizes the concept of conscientious objection. But there is, of course, many, many issues that are associated with that, and it could benefit from a lot more thinking, and so certainly we would love to hear from members on this. And you're welcome to contact myself, or today if you have a comment or want to have your voice heard on this particular subject, let us know. The floor is really meant to be yours. So Josephine, the next comment or question?
Yep. Will RNAO have another public dialogue with the same speakers as during the AGM, but have these speakers speak for a longer time?
Great feedback. It's something that we'll definitely consider.
In the interest of informed consent, do clients need to know that many world religions believe in life after death in cases of surgery?
Mm-hmm. So again, I think that it's a very well thought out comment here. And in terms of, I don't have an answer. These are not quite questions that are easily answered, but I think that, it brings to light that there are many, interests that are, and sometimes competing interests that are at play when approaching this issue in terms of, autonomy, when also respect for protecting those who may be considered vulnerable, moral interests, people who have different spiritual or religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, that certainly influence the way in which we live and also influence the way that death is considered. And these are things that need to be thought through. But at the same time, as nurses, I think we have an obligation to ensure that we deliver person-centered care and that the desires and autonomy of someone who is a competent individual are respected. And so this is really where we're calling for the regulatory framework to be able to enable that attempts to balance many of those very competing and highly contextual interests. So I know it seems like I don't have a lot of answers. These are very big questions and things that I don't think that we could answer in one webinar. But for people who are hearing me speak about this, if you have comments or wanted to add things or to have your views heard on this particular issue, we'd certainly welcome that. Josephine, are there others in the line?
Yes. Barb Roche, you'd like to express another question or comment?
Great, welcome, Barb.
Two things. One is I'm not sure that everybody on the line knows, I'm sure you do, Tim, that two of the three people who were appointed to the federal panel by the Crown, by this government, were witnesses against doctor-assisted suicide in the BC case. So I think that we have to be kind of a little bit aware of that. I found that interesting. I was happy to see that there was now a 9-panel provincial territorial group. I would expect that perhaps they'd be a little bit more balanced. And the other thing is, do you know if the college is working on something actively, on drafts that they would have ready for the new year if we did have a new law?
Unfortunately, Barb, I'm not aware.
Of regulations?
Unfortunately, I'm not aware, Barb. It's a great question, and it's one that I will follow up on, but I don't have an answer, and certainly I can't speak for the college right now.
Thank you.
No problem. Others who'd like to speak? I'll open things up right now to those who are on the phone. If you have any questions or comments, the floor is yours.
Tim, it's Bev. I have a comment.
Sure.
I just would like to suggest that, and I'm not asking for any answer here, but I just want to comment that I've been a bedside nurse for 42 years of my nursing career, and most of those years were in palliative care. And I have to say, from my personal experience, when I look back on those in my care, I've never had anybody ask me to help them end their life or tell me they wanted to die, because at that time the healthcare system provided care for those families who couldn't manage the care at home, and nurses and doctors in the hospital system provided free support regardless of your condition. You didn't have to be acute or chronic. If you were dying and you couldn't manage and the family couldn't take care of you at home, we took care of that for the family in the hospital as nurses. And so people didn't die in a way where families were struggling with the burden of physical care and struggling with the burden of the cost of care at home or needing to take time off work. And I have heard since, in 42 years of nursing, obviously the healthcare system has changed. People are being charged now if they don't die within a certain number of days, if they choose to remain in the hospital to die, despite if they have a long-term care home bed or not. And then families are double charged, right? They have to pay for their hospital bed and a long-term care home bed if they don't die within the 3-week mark or whatever that hospital chooses for it to be. My point in all this is we camouflage end-of-life care and palliative care as being better if people die at home, and people recover better if they're at home. But the reality is people are getting sicker with chronic disease, and people are suffering with terminal illnesses at a younger and younger age. And families, therefore, are coping with these people with chronic diseases and end-of-life diseases that require 24-hour care at home with CCAC services that are inadequate. So what I'm seeing now in my nursing profession, I'm a palliative care nurse, is that patients are asking more to die. I've never seen that before because they see not only they're struggling with their own personal health issues, but now they're watching the burden they are becoming to their families in a financial way, in a emotional way. I mean, people are bound to their homes if they don't have somebody to come in and stay. A lot of these people at end of life cannot be left alone, and we do not provide 24-hour nursing care in the home. So I now find more and more people in my care are asking to have their life ended so they're not a burden to anybody. And I would like to suggest that I hope RNAO has some sort of a insight into, are we doing enough as healthcare providers to make sure that people don't feel this is the best option for them because they can't afford to be sick any longer, or they don't want to be a burden on their families, or families who are working cannot afford to stay home without pay to provide that care. And I think that's one piece when I did the survey, Tim, I didn't see anything about. There was a question about, do you have a family member with a chronic disease, which I have, but there wasn't a question about, was the health care sufficient? And the question was asked, do you believe in assisted suicide? And I said, I have a hard time accepting that choice because with all of the medical technology we have, nobody has to die suffering anymore. We have extremely brilliant palliative physicians, the best we've ever had in the last 20 years, and we have all kinds of new medical advances. So this concept about dying an unbearable illness, should be minimal. That should be the minimal concern. I think the bigger concern we have is not the unbearable illness, but is there enough support for these families who are not allowed to be admitted to the hospital, who are being told they're better off at home, and can't grieve as a grieving family member, but now have to become the care partner and provide all the care. And I think that's a big piece I don't see in all this discussion that I think maybe somehow we need to include.
Thanks, Bev, for that feedback, and it's great to have you on the line, especially given your expertise in palliative care. I think that you've raised excellent points in terms of some of the challenges right now in accessing palliative and end-of-life care, and it's something that RNAO as an association is very much trying to champion. We need to ensure that people have equitable access to palliative care. Certainly we've heard concerns from people depending upon where you live in the province. There's geographical variation in terms of the type of services that you receive, and really recognizing that nurses, and when I say nurses, registered nurses and nurse practitioners, when fully enabled, will and they already are, but don't get me wrong, but can do so much even more if they're enabled to be able to deliver quality palliative and end-of-life care services. We really are the key to being able to do that, and we need to ensure that anyone in this province has access to publicly funded palliative and end-of-life care services. And certainly we've heard of instances where people, who unfortunately, have to go and pursue additional services on their own dime, and certainly that's not something that we feel should be acceptable, and we should be able to have access to publicly funded services. And so that is, I think, a pivotal point. But the other point that, again, and this is, balancing that perspective, we've also heard from, people who have talked about stories of, even if they had access to, the best palliative care services in the world, and they still have their particular value, and they would, want to explore assisted death because that is who they are, that is their autonomy, and they want to have their autonomy respected. And so
I think there's two issues, Ken, and I agree with that. I think there are some people who want that choice, but I think there's just as many or more who are making that choice because we have let them down. Our healthcare system hasn't met their needs. And when I say met their needs, I think we have to change our philosophy of the government and the hospitals dictating what kind of services they're going to provide according to their budget. I think we need to think more about how are we going to help those people, and there's many of them in the community who just can't cope in their homes with that. I mean, they have to go to work. There's nobody to be with these people. We have a lot of elderly that we're asking to be left in the community as long as possible. But I don't think it's realistic to assume that even though it might be a better place for them, it would be the perfect place for them if we provided 24-hour care so that families could go on with their lives, because the drugs, even when you're at home, are normally not covered. So some of those drugs, especially with cancer, can be very, very expensive. So I think there's a lot of issues here other than just a cultural belief, but I think we need to make sure that people aren't choosing end of life because they just can't bear being that type of a burden any longer. And there are many of those.
Tim, it's Mark calling. And I feel a need to comment on that as well, because all of the points are very valid. And it is all about choice. But I think we have to be very careful not to view everything from our particular sector and bringing up those kinds of points. Because as many people who choose to die in hospital choose to die at home, et cetera, I think the last speaker's point is very valid, that we have to make sure that they aren't making a decision based on gaps or based on what is or isn't doable in someone else's mind. And I think as we have to look at supporting people in any setting that they wish to be involved in, and enabling people and empowering people to make that choice, we also have to provide the funding to support those services. And realistically, I mean, when a lot of families do choose to, whether they see it as a burden or not see it as a burden, they do choose expected death at home. So I think when we're speaking, we have to be very careful that we don't allow our perspective to come into what is choice and what is possible and doable for people. We merely have to lobby the government to make sure, as you said before, that the resources are there to allow people to make that choice.
I think that's very well said, and really, at the end of the day, rests with people, the public, clients, patients, and we need to ensure that their autonomy is respected.
Tim, I wonder if I could make a comment.
Sure, who's this?
Jean Eklund.
Oh, great, welcome.
Well, I've enjoyed listening. I'm just wondering if RNAO has given any thought to the impact of actually participating in euthanasia and assisted suicide, the impact psychologically and emotionally on those at the bedside who know that things can be well managed with good palliative care. You know, the impact, and I'm thinking of an existential or spiritual crisis, PTSD, which with its inherent anxiety and distress and nightmares. Down the way, some of the physicians in Holland have certainly talked about this. And I think it really needs to be considered. What is the impact on us as care providers who have to take part in this?
Thank you for that point, and I think that your comment extends even further than looking just at assisted death, and certainly we've heard of instances where nurses, in the workplace have, unfortunately be victims of, violence, who have, gone through very, traumatic experiences in delivering care. So I think it's a much broader concept that needs to be explored, particularly looking at how do we support, the health and well-being of our profession, of nurses, of, each other as colleagues. Because while I think nursing is an incredibly rewarding and very enriching and fulfilling profession that we all are very privileged to share, it is also one that is very difficult in finding ourselves in, highly complex, ethical, situations. And so certainly there is, quite a bit of strain that can be associated with that. And one of the things that was included within the resolution is that one of the principles was that no healthcare professional or organization should ever be forced to participate in assisted death. And certainly I think that there are some, I think right now it's a bit challenging because there's so much that's unknown and we're responding to something that, we have very little detail with. And I think that if we have a very solid, well thought out, principled regulatory framework that can govern this, that, respects the autonomy of the individual, that, because at the end of the day, it really is about the people that we're caring for. That being said, of course, we also need to take care of ourselves. So your point is well taken, and I think is something that, again, needs to be considered as we continue to explore this issue. The more and more that we talk about it, I think the more and more questions start to emerge, and we begin to think about things that we need to look into in more depth and whatnot. And it would be really interesting, and I don't have the research here in front of me, but it's something we can look into. You've quoted some experiences from some of the other jurisdictions, and I'm sure that they would be able to offer us some learnings that we could consider here, because there are jurisdictions, even within North America, several U.S. states, and of course countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world who have authorized assisted death for a number of years, and it's been something that has been quite extensively researched, and so certainly we can draw upon those learnings as well.
Tim, I'd just like to add that I really like Jane's point and what Mark had to say too, and you really touched on something, and I think when we're doing this, we have to really make an insightful, comprehensive evaluation so that those making the request have had the services they require to support them to the best of their ability, not what we say we can provide, but what they need to continue. And in the states, and I've done a lot of research on this, but there are some states in the United States that when people have cancer and they have a reoccurrence, now the insurance companies won't fund their treatment, but they will provide the money for the $70 for the pills that are required for them to end their life. So I think there's a lot of safeguards we need to have in place.
Absolutely, and building those safeguards, I think, is something that we really need to be involved in right now. We need to have the discussion, and I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on the line. If you want to follow up with me afterwards, send me a note of some of the things that you think would be important for RNAO to be advocating for, things that we should be considering when we're engaging with, the expert panel. I would really welcome to hear from that, because I think what I'm hearing from people, what I sense is that really I think that accessing palliative care and end-of-life care is an important thing, and we want to ensure that everyone has the ability to access that, but then also the ability to choose, to ensure that people are supported to have their autonomy respected. So I'm just going to pause there, and Josephine, is there comments that have come through on the WebEx platform?
Yes. Participant is responding to one of the previous speakers on the line. She agrees with the comments, and she says it highlights the huge need for support in the community. Palliative care in her community where she works is very fractured. She's the same comments from the families that she's and that most of the families want their loved one to die at home, but it's not a possibility for them because they cannot cope at home.
I think that these are absolutely important points to consider, and at the same time consider them in parallel to the fact that it needs to be I think our thinking and the way we approach this needs to be grounded in terms of what are the interests and what are the needs of individuals, and what is it that they want, and what wishes do they have. Ensuring that they have access to quality palliative, absolutely, and ensuring everyone has equitable access to that, but also at the end of the day, being able to respect their autonomy and their ultimately what they want to do, and it's their decision, right? It's our decision as individuals, as members of the public. And I think that nurses are, one of the interesting things, the most striking things that one of the more striking things that I've come across is people keep calling this physician-assisted death, and it's concerning to me to hear that, because I think that it suggests that this is a physician issue, and this is something that just physicians are going to be grappling with, and we all know that that's not going to be the case. That nurses, it remains to be foreseen what the government is going to actually do in terms of the policy framework to implement. So while the court decision said physician-assisted death, certainly the government has the ability to implement policy in whichever way they want to do that. And so what will the role of the nurse be? And ensuring, I think I've heard quite loudly as well on the call today that the need to ensure that there is support for the nurse, ensuring that there are, practice standards and regulations that are in place so that nurses feel as though they are supported in this. And certainly I think it marks a very significant change in, in the landscape, and so it's going to be well thought through, as our colleagues have been commenting on the line tonight. So great comments are being offered on the chat box.
Sure. One question is, are there drafts available on the provincial monitoring and reporting system yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Another participant says, the statement that no organization should be required to participate appears to be a dangerous statement, allowing organizations to deny what a patient feels is in their best interest.
Legislation.
Their healthcare professional believes assisted death is appropriate as well. Why does RNAO support this?
That's a great question, and this, as I mentioned, was something that was included in the resolution that was brought forward to the annual general meeting, and so it was something that the consultation representatives there had supported. And I think it's something that I don't have an answer to this. This is a very, complex question, and, just like we said before, we need to respect autonomy and the choices of people and ensuring that they have access to whatever it is that they want to access. And, certainly in the experience that we've had with things, such as, abortion, there have been, certain organizations. Ontario, of course, has a history of certain healthcare organizations that have different religious affiliations with it. And in those instances, they may not offer particular services. And so it's a very challenging, very complex issue that needs to be thought through, because in terms of, again, wanting to respect people's choice, so what then option are they given, if they can access a particular service at a particular healthcare organization, and ensuring that, that they do have access to be able to pursue what it is that they want to pursue. So to the individual who has posed that, put that comment forward, if you have ideas or reflections or thoughts on this particular topic and want to chat more, would welcome your thoughts either tonight, or if you wanted to connect with me separately, I'd be happy to do that.
Another comment is that I fully agree that home care is so inadequate that it allows us to think that assisted suicide is an option that wasn't even an issue years ago. Money should not be the cause of poor care, so that end of life does not cause hardship to the patient and the family.
I think that, we heard about that in previous comments, and, money shouldn't be, I think, the driving force around this. It should be what is the individual's choice and what is their autonomy, ensuring that their autonomy is respected, ensuring that they have the ability to access what it is that they want to access, and they feel supported to be able to do as they wish, right? Josephine, are there any other questions or comments on there?
Can I make a comment? I think it's great that you recognize that money shouldn't be the driving force, but unfortunately with the environment of the healthcare system right now, that is a driving force. Locally, our home care our nursing is paid for, are funded the government is funding private organizations who are for-profit to hire nurses, and nurses are not being paid the same price as they are getting in hospital. So needless to say, there's very few nurses working in home support and home care. So I know locally that's a huge issue, so when I hear about end-of-life discussions and palliative care, it's a huge barrier when you're not compensating nurses. You want them to work to full scope. So I think the government has to stop privatizing some of this health care, and health care should be about health, not about money, but unfortunately it is more about money with hospital budgets and all that, so it does put patients in a very vulnerable situation.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for that. That was actually one of the points that we brought up when myself, as well as the chair of the Palliative Care Nurses Interest Group, when we met with we had brought up the need to ensure that we actually have a sustainable community care workforce, and that one of the significant barriers right now that's impacting both retention and recruitment is the wages, salary, and benefit discrepancies that exist between institutional care as well as within the community. And it's something that we are continuing to champion, that we're trying to change. Want to be able to shift care increasingly to the community and away from hospital. You know, it is imperative that we have the workforce in place to be able to do that. And I talked earlier about nursing having a tremendous value and opportunity to be able to, improve access to palliative and end-of-life care. And we need to ensure that we have, a sustainable workforce in place. And one of the ways to do that is to ensure that there is that compensation and benefit equity. The other point that I just wanted to bring up, and I think that this is a whole separate topic within itself, but it's that I would be very happy and proud to talk about, is RNAO's Enhancing Community Care for Ontarians model that really addresses some of the both structural as well as service delivery gaps that exist. And so for those of you who may be familiar with the ECHO model, I'd love to chat more about it, or if you aren't, you can actually go on to RNAO's website on www.rnao.ca/ECO, and you can learn more about it. I'm just sorry to interrupt here, but I'm noticing some background noise, so if your phone isn't on mute, if I could just ask you to please hit the mute button on your phone, or by hitting *6. That would be greatly appreciated. And I'm hearing again some background noise. So please ensure that your phone is muted. Double check, please.
You've got to give informed consent, so people need to know that most of major religions believe that.
I'm sorry, is the person speaking right now, are you trying to provide a comment, or?
It's Christian.
If I could just get you to please mute your line, if you wouldn't mind pressing *6 or muting. I'm just going to read off a couple of the comments here, and I just want to let everyone know that we do have 15 minutes that are left in the dialogue today. So the question that we've received here on the web is there a community in Ontario that has modeled good palliative care following proper practice guidelines? And this particular individual has heard of a program in Brantford that is part of the hospice new model. So there are a lot of very good palliative care programs that are out there, and I think that we do need to acknowledge that although there are some challenges and there are inequities in terms of where and how palliative care services are provided, there is a lot of good that is being done, a tremendous amount of good being done. And so there are some really, really good models out there. I think that, certainly from our perspective and what I'm hearing tonight is that there needs to be, equitable access to those, really good models, and ensuring that everyone has the ability to be able to receive palliative care if they choose that that's the road that they want to go down, and at the same time being able to respect their autonomy and their wishes, and ensuring that they are making a decision that truly is based on what their values and needs and desires are. For some, palliative care, we want to make that an option to everyone, but then there are also others who, again, as I mentioned before, who, despite being offered all of the best palliative care, would still choose and should be supported to make that choice if that's what they, want to do for themselves. Who want to, pursue other options.
Like George Carey.
Oh, I'm hearing we're having some background dialogue that's coming through on the phone. So if you wouldn't mind, please muting your lines. I think I'm sounding like a broken record here, so I apologize. But it just helps, I think, for everyone's audio quality. And then the last comment here, I'm going to take this last one on the chat box, and then I'm going to bring it back to the line for any final thoughts. But this person has recognized nobody has talked about this in regards to mental health issues for the reason to do this or the capacity to make this decision. And so certainly in our analysis and looking at other jurisdictions, the issue around mental health as well as consent and capacity is a huge one. And it's something that needs to be thoughtfully considered in ensuring that when we're building a regulatory mechanism in Canada, that we have this is considered to be a very important factor, ensuring that, the decision that is being made is being done based upon, a competent person's desires and wishes. And there are a number of different ways and approaches that can be secured, and the reason I say that is because we learn from other jurisdictions, whether it be in the U.S. or whether it be in some of the European countries, and there's a lot of research out there that talks about, some of the challenges, the strengths of those models, and I think that, it's something that, we could talk about it at length, but it's a very important consideration. Some instances, people I've heard in other jurisdictions you have to go to get two separate, medical evaluations. Some instances you have to go to a psychiatrist for that capacity review. And I'm not endorsing a particular model or saying this is the way it is. I'm just saying that there's a lot of diversity out there, but it seems to be, no matter what model we look at in whatever country, something that comes out as being an important consideration. So having 10 minutes left on the line here, I'm going to, again, open it up to people who are on the line who want to provide any closing comments or feedback, or if there's anything that that hasn't been said yet that you would like to share at this point, I'd ask you to do so now.
Jean Eklund again.
Go ahead, Jean.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I'm thinking that the whole issue is around death management. We aren't really discussing that this is palliative care. It's not. It's when someone wants to die and wants to move it along. That's almost separate from any notion of good palliative care. I think it shouldn't be a part of it. And I really wonder, should it be a part of health care at all? It's a procedure for putting someone to death. And as the Supreme Court has suggested, and if we could follow Belgium's protocol, for example, where they have a separate death clinic, and they also have mobile units that go to the home if someone wants to die at home, that would take nurses and doctors who didn't want to participate off the hook, as well as institutions. And let's face it, we are going to be afraid to go in, at my age at least, for a surgical procedure, thinking there is a possibility I could be a bed blocker and down the way, I don't really want to be euthanized. And we're listening to only those who want this radical autonomy. I don't know, just a thoughts I'm throwing out. Thanks, Tim.
No problem. Thanks, Jean. And I think that certainly, the hope could be that those fears could be remedied by having that strong regulatory framework. Certainly, we don't want anyone to be, hospitalized with the fear that, they could be forced into having this done. And that was one of the principles that was also included within the resolution, is that this really is something that needs to be driven by the person, not by healthcare professionals. The person needs to be the one who's initiating this, and that there needs to be that process that's in place to ensure that that the person is competent, that this is in fact what they want, that there's a dedicated waiting period to give them plenty of opportunity to be able to reconsider, and a lot of thinking needs to go into that. So thank you for your comments.
Well, they may have got the
Are there other comments or feedback that anyone would like to share that hasn't been addressed yet? Okay, so I think we might wrap up a little bit early tonight. We have about 5 minutes to go, but I just would like to take an opportunity to be able to thank everyone tonight for coming, for participating and sharing your comments and asking very good questions and giving us things to consider as we move forward. And as I mentioned, for those of you who were expecting a lot of answers to very complex questions, unfortunately I don't have those answers for you tonight, but I'm glad that the questions are being asked because it helps to reinforce for us the things that we need to be, taking a closer look at and ensuring that we are here to be able to support our members, and that's something that we want to continue to do as we continue to advance this dialogue. And so for any of you who might be interested in participating in another dialogue, or if you wanted to share with friends and colleagues, please note that our president, Dr. Vanessa Burkowski, will be leading a very similar dialogue as the one tonight on September the 14th. Josephine, is it the same time?
Yes, it is.
Same time, so it commences at 4:45 Eastern Standard Time to 6:15. Josephine, is there a follow-up survey that's sent out, or evaluation form?
We haven't.
Okay, so we'll look into that. But other than that, I just want to thank you all very much for the opportunity to connect. And this certainly is not the end by any means. Josephine had put up my contact information, and I would invite any of you to feel free to get in contact with myself, or our CEO, Doris Grinspan, who's very interested and eager to connect with any member or individual of the public or any other healthcare professional that would be interested in participating in this. And I just want to close on the note and reinforcing the importance of participating in those 2 consultation opportunities that I mentioned, both at the federal level as well as the provincial survey that's being led through Ontario. This is your opportunity to have your voice heard both as a nurse as well as a member of the public, and I'm really hoping that you get an opportunity to do that. And on that note, we hope you have a great night, and thank you for joining us this evening.